it felt as if it seemed to him they were beings of light, but humans. And these beings were communicating with each other just through the power of thought. And when they would speak, it would be sweet, it would be short, but it was like music. And when they would move, it would be like a dance. And he saw all the creatures of the earth, the birds, the bees, all the animals, all the flowers and trees, everything moving in harmony, being orchestrated just simply by unseen forces, as if they were part of that beautiful music and melody, a symphony of colors, of fragrances, of sounds, of the wind rustling through the leaves, a world that we would describe as paradise. And he heard this voice say to him, "You have to create this world." And he reflected very deeply, and he went to his last guru. He'd had a series of 12 gurus, and each guru had suggested to him that he moves on to the next, because his thirst for knowledge was so deep, intense. So they normally would have one guru, but in his case, each guru passed him on to the next, the next, the next. And so he went to the 12th guru that he had, the last one. And the man couldn't understand any of the things he was describing. And so he realized that it had to be through his own personal reflection that he had to come to terms with all this. And he began to understand that, yes, the Supreme was a being of light. Secondly, he understood that there was goodness in every human soul, and that goodness could be expressed, and yes, whom he had venerated as God, but in fact, every human has their own highest potential and could achieve that purest state once again. And making sense of this vision of this transformation that he had seen, he understood that there would come a time when the present day world wouldn't be able to continue in its present form, but would go through a transition. It wouldn't be an end and finish, but rather it would be a transition from a state of chaos to, again, a state of harmony, but a lot of upheaval within all of that. But within that better world, a better future for humanity, he understood that there had to be equality. And he wondered how all this was going to be possible. And gradually, over a period of time, he began to understand that it would be through education, spiritual education, education of the inner being. He also understood that in order to create a world of harmony, equality was vital, justice was absolutely essential. And he looked around and he saw the state of women in Sindh at that time. And they were definitely second-class citizens. And so he made two decisions. He decided that he would like to open a school where there could be spiritual education. There were lots of schools, there was a lot of different types of education available, but a school dedicated to spirituality, and not just the understanding of spirituality, but the practice in a practical lifestyle. And he understood that women had to be given that opportunity to be able to claim their rightful place of equality. So probably what I would now describe as affirmative action. He decided that it would be women and girls who would be the teachers and leaders. And as he was sharing some of these ideas, he was also chanting Om. And those who would come to that circle of Om, became known as the ones who went to the Om Mandli, the gathering of Om. And it was a time of magic because word spread around and many would come to his home. And the house was tiny, so they would be gathering outside in the veranda, in the courtyard. And the chanting of Om led to so many different people having trance-like experiences. And people didn't understand what was going on. But what he decided he needed to do was to go away and spend time in solitude, which he did. He went into the Himalayas and spent time in Kashmir for 3 months, thinking deeply about what he had seen and experienced, and prepared himself for the next phase of his life. And he decided that he would retire from his business and told his partner that whatever was his rightful share should come to him, but he wouldn't get into any discussion or debate about it. And the partner was an honest man, and so he got his rightful share. And the satsang, the gathering of Om, had been growing even during his absence. And so by the time he came back, it was a fair-sized gathering, and mostly women and children, because men folk were mostly away on business in far distant corners of the globe. That community, the Sindhi community, was very much in that practice of the men folk going away for business and then coming back every so often to be with their families and going away again. And so the gathering happened to be women and children mostly, but also some families, some men. And when he came back and saw things were flourishing, out of the people who were there, he chose 12 young women who could be the trustees of the foundation that he was to set up. And these were young women between the ages of 16 and 20. And most of them never knew about bank accounts. Most of them knew very little English, Hindi, English, Sindhi. These were the prevalent languages in that community, but they knew very little English. Most of them had had only very basic education. But the message he was receiving was, this is what you have to do. You have to put women as the leaders, as the teachers. And so this trust was then the beneficiary of his lifetime's work. And he surrendered everything to this trust and kept nothing back for himself. It was an incredible time. It was a time not only of magic, but of course, then it became a time of opposition, rejection from the community that had loved him and supported him for a long time. Now these are very strange ideas, women being given the authority. It was very odd. He decided he needed to go away again, but this time with his family to Karachi, not so far away as Kashmir. And so he came to Karachi with his family, and somehow, whether it was intuition, whether it was instinct, but around 400 people gathered around him in Karachi, coming from the different places where they lived. And so he suddenly discovered he had to take care of 400 people, but he managed pretty well. He knew all the people in the council, in the municipality where they were staying. And so 7 different houses were created for young girls, for older women, for children, for young men, and for other brothers. So different parts of the society, and all of them were then coming together for meditation, for classes, but they lived in all those separate homes, and they would meet from time to time. And meanwhile, outside there was World War II going on. Then it was the partition war that was going on. But this community, for a period of 14 years, from 1937 onwards, stayed as an enclosed order. And within that, what they were doing was experimenting in the laboratory of their minds. They were experimenting with the consciousness of the inner being, the soul, connecting with the divine. They were understanding the cycle of the world and how that turns and repeats. A lot of very profound ideas that have been prevalent in the East, but now the explanation that was being given was very detailed and specific. And the timetable that they followed at first was very open and flexible, and as time went on, highly disciplined, with meditation at 4 o'clock in the morning, and then a timetable of activity, but also spiritual study and spiritual engagement. And it would be days and days of silence, sometimes a week of silence, sometimes a month of silence. And during those periods of silence, the activity in terms of the work would continue, but they would have more time for meditation, silence, and they were receiving very deep instructions through their silence. And so things became more and more clear in terms of the teachings, in terms of what was the purpose of the group, the function of the group. And so that period continued throughout that period of the partition war. But although most of their relatives by then had moved to India, the instruction they were given was, you carry on here. And so in that period between independence for Pakistan and India, but the time that they actually moved to headquarters in Abu, they were following their spiritual discipline and leading a life in which they were instruments for peace, sharing peace with the world. And not a single hair of anyone's head was harmed, even though in the house where it was the young sisters, there were 60 young sisters staying there. And the community around them, of course, knew that, but they remained protected with the power of peace, the power of nonviolence, the power of yoga. And of course, they were being given instructions continually. For another year, when they moved to Abu, the guidance came, it's time to move. And they moved just before the military dictatorships began in Pakistan. They needed to be able to breathe, they needed to be able to move. And so before things became difficult, they were able to move, and the authorities gave them permission to go as a group to India and take their belongings with them. So it was a lot of support from the community. Arriving in Mount Abu, it was another challenge. From sea level to the mountains, from perpetual warmth to seasons that were very cold and monsoon rain, many challenges of health, of various issues. It was after the war. Their funds had run low because they'd spent a huge amount of money moving across to India. They came by ship and then by train, all the way then going up the mountain in Abu. And so things were very challenging. If anybody came to Brahma Baba, by then he had been given the name Brahma Baba. If anybody came and wanted to do other things, Baba would say to them, of course, child, of course. So the tree was shaken, but 350 survived that period and emerged as amazing, powerful teachers. And one of them, of course, was Daddy Janki, who I had the fortune of knowing very, very closely. And in fact, when I'd gone on holiday in India at one point, it was a visit to Dadi that transformed my life and made my life as it is today. And through that period of teenage years, whilst we were living in London, but my mother was connected with the Brahma Kumaris, we would go to Abu, and I met Brahma Baba in 1966, 67, 68, 3 times in 68. So those encounters were life transforming. And those encounters are still fresh in my mind, the way Baba would look at each one with that love, that respect, but always seeing the soul, and even being able to speak about the future of the soul. And so I had many, many blessings from Brahma Baba, and I had surrendered and decided that this was to be my life when I was 19. And this is by then 1968. I'd left university, gone to India for a sabbatical, but that became a long sabbatical. And in fact, during that period, understanding Raj Yoga and practicing it made me decide that this is to be my life. And Brahma Baba's warmth and love and charisma and wisdom guided me hugely. And whilst I was still in India at one of the ashrams, Brahma Baba passed away on the 18th of January, 1969. And the comfort in my heart was that I'd made my choice while he was still here with us. And after that, I was asked to come back to London to be with my parents again, but with a mission to be able to share these ideas. And a little while later, a delegation came from India, and exactly 50 years ago now, in October 1971, the first center outside India started. And everybody needs peace, everybody needs an understanding of spirituality. And so the message was spread, and many, many now are part of the network of centers across the world. And of course, day by day, we see how those visions are really coming true in a practical sense. And we see what's going on in the world. But Baba had predicted the whole subject of climate change in a very detailed way, but also that out of the things that we have done to ourselves and the planet, the way out would be the connection with the divine. So that through that spiritual power, there would be renewal of the human spirit, but also renewal of the planet itself. So it's been fascinating to be part of the climate change conferences in 2009 every year. And this last one which took place in Glasgow, you know all the details of that. But the incognito work that was going on, so many spiritual organizations, religious organizations are coming together to form what's called the faith-based organization network, and working together, sharing meditations, prayers, things are definitely going to move towards a better future. So I'll end with that note of hope that for me, that day when we see that world of harmony and peace is not so far off, but all of us have to come together in this way to actually make it happen. Let's have a few minutes of silence. I'll conduct the silence, if I may, guiding it with a few thoughts. Going deep within, aware of the inner being, the spiritual being that I am, the soul. I connect with the goodness within. And in this connection with the divine, not just aware of the physical dimension, but also the task that needs to be done from up above. Drawing the light, the love, the peace, the joy from this source of light and love